if you're also stressed out. How do we know that you're stressed out, and how does that impact the way you react with one another in the workplace?
It's one thing to pay employees to do a job, okay? And it's another thing to get them motivated enough or feel included enough that they're willing to go the extra mile just to achieve results.
When you're upset or something is not going well, this is how you are. It's not personal. I'm not going to take it personally, right? So a lot of times the misunderstanding happens when you do something or act in a certain way and I take it the wrong way. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inclusive Workplaces with Amara. I'm your host, Dr. Amara, and on this podcast, we share strategies and best practices, as well as stories on how to build and lead inclusive workplaces. And today, I have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about why Nigeria needs inclusive workplaces now more than ever. And joining me to have this wonderful conversation is none other than a good friend of mine, Bumi Saidi. I'm going to welcome her to the stage. Welcome, Bumi.
Hi, Amara. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm so excited to have you on the show today. For many of you out there, you may be wondering, who is Bumi? And I want to quickly share her bio because she's a really phenomenal woman. Bumi Saidi is a seasoned organizational development and governance specialist with over 15 years of experience leading public sector reform, institutional strengthening, and strategic transformation in Nigeria. She brings a wealth of experience with a joy and a heart for organizational development. And I'm really, really keen to hear her perspectives around this very topic. How do we make the workplace more inclusive within a Nigerian context?
Thank you, Amara. I'm excited to be here. And inclusivity in the workplace within the Nigerian context is a very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I think it's very important for us to perhaps start by talking about what we think an inclusive workplace is. And I will start by saying that for me, when I hear the word inclusion or having an inclusive workplace within the lens that I work in, which is around team development, for me, it's really about empowering teams to be aware. So just raising the self-awareness of team members, as well as the leader, to ensure that people who work together are given the tools and the support needed to accomplish their strategic goals. Welcome, where people feel supported, where they feel like they belong, and they're able to really harness their expertise to do good work. I don't know, Bumi, if you want to add a few words there.
I agree with you completely. I mean, it's just as the name implies, an inclusive workplace is a work environment where people feel included, either it's in decision making, whether it's going as far as deciding what the overarching goals of the organization is. Any work that makes the special effort to make staff feel like they belong, like their voice matters. I mean, that, to my mind, is what an inclusive workplace is. And I think that it's not something that's easily achieved. Quite a few organizations are trying to get there. And even though they may not have gotten to that level of saying, oh, we have a totally inclusive workplace, credit should be given to any organization that is making the effort to create an inclusive environment for their staff.
Thank you so much, Bumi. I wonder, like, the idea of inclusion is somewhat, we think of it as somewhat westernized ideology. And I wonder if there's like a clash, or could be a clash, when we talk about inclusion and the Nigerian context, because respect is really important culturally for us in the workplace. And think about inclusion, we also looking at psychological safety. That is one's ability to feel safe, to ask questions, to share maybe even contrary ideas, or maybe challenge decisions or ways of doing things. So sometimes that can be very difficult just because of the nature of the culture. And I wonder, have you seen this play out sometimes? What do you think?
Yes, the whole idea of inclusivity might have started out as maybe a Western ideology, but increasingly it's becoming embedded in the way organizations are run, in the way they go about their operations, in the way they manage their human resources. Of course, there are cultural differences, and so there will be slight nuances to how inclusivity or inclusiveness is defined, And within the Nigerian context, we have, like you mentioned, respect is a very strong aspect of our culture here. Within the Nigerian context, I think inclusivity is becoming increasingly recognized, something that is very important for an organization's success, because let's face it, It's one thing to pay employees to do a job, okay? And it's another thing to get them motivated enough or feel included enough that they're willing to
Mhm.
go the extra mile just to achieve results. That, and I think organizations, even within the Nigerian context, have realized that you are more likely as an organization to achieve your goals and your objectives if your staff feel like they're empowered. Either it is empowered to contribute to the discussions, decision making, empowered enough to make mistakes and not be afraid,
Mm.
try new things, to be innovative, to be creative. In the Nigerian context, so like I mentioned before, respect is a major factor here. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes that respect can sometimes hinder people from speaking
Yeah.
openly, coming out and speaking their mind. Because again, you want to show some deference to your superiors and you don't want to be the one voicing out a dissenting opinion. That's becoming almost like a thing of the past. I mean, within the scope that I have worked, the experiences I've had with organizations now, leadership is increasingly trying to make people feel comfortable enough to contribute to the conversation. So yes, there might be an element of fear in terms of not wanting to disrespect or being afraid to speak up or make a mistake, maybe fear of
Mhm.
losing the job or whatever. But I think the organizations are
Yeah.
actually to help their staff overcome something that is also that is becoming increasingly prominent in Nigeria now is the recognition of the role of women in the
Mm.
organization and the efforts that are being made to help them feel included. I mean, now the law says that a woman who is about to have a baby is entitled to 4 months of maternity leave. It used to be, I think, less before. So
Yeah.
that was thing that has just been increased. And then you have in some organizations, even after the woman returns from leave, there are some type of arrangements that are made to, help her maybe either close from work early to go and
Mhm.
come a bit later in the morning, not so
Mhm.
early in the morning. She has had her time at home.
Mhm.
And these efforts go a long way in making the woman feel included in the workplace, feel like, oh, yes, they recognize that I have this need. They also recognize the value I bring. And so they're willing to take these steps to help me
Yeah.
balance or, yeah, exactly. So that's something that's also becoming increasingly prominent within the
Mhm.
Nigerian context.
Yeah, I really like that. I like that. That there's a certain level of accommodation that's being made, especially for women. I know people complain. Worked in Nigeria, and I remember also I was in a conversation where some women were saying that they didn't even have a place to nurse their babies. They were saying, but I remember in that particular instance, provisions were being made. So I think it's really great that these elements around inclusivity, because inclusion is also about how, like you rightly said, how do we create an environment where people can do good work? And just because you're a nursing mother doesn't mean that you can't do good work. And if you're given the right environment to thrive, so yeah, that's very important. I also want to go back to what you mentioned previously around respect, and I think that also has to do with like some generational gaps, because of course there's a younger workforce, yeah, and the older ones, they're still there. I think that could also cause some kind of friction sometimes, because yeah, you may be young with a lot of experience and a lot of interesting and innovative ways of doing things, but just because there's a certain way of doing things before, maybe a certain kind of understanding or knowledge, that can also, like you said, hinder people from speaking up and coming with their great ideas. So yeah, I can see how that could also be a barrier. And I wonder about religion. I would say there are maybe two main religions, right? And then maybe the traditional one. So I wonder about that. Like, there are still some barriers still, even though there are accommodations being made. I think we definitely need to talk about religion and ethnicity, a major problem, I would say, yeah, in Nigeria. I don't know what you.
Maybe not necessarily a problem, but it is a factor. Most workplaces within the Nigerian context are very diverse. You have people from
Mhm.
different ethnicities, people from different religions. But like I said before, increasingly organizations are trying to make sure that no one feels discriminated against.
Mm.
Efforts are being made, accommodations are being made for some of the peculiarity, whatever it is, whatever religion or tribe you practice or you're from, your deliverables are still your deliverables. You still have to
Yeah.
deliver it. And so that should not even be presented as an excuse
As
for
yeah.
and when you mentioned the gap, the generational gap, have the older generation in the workplace, and then you have the younger ones that don't have maybe as many inhibitions as the older generation. I think it's a two-way because on the one hand, you have the older generation maybe not giving the younger ones room enough to express themselves or room enough to be creative or maybe to bring different perspectives into the
Yeah.
conversation. But I think also it's important for the young ones as well to include the older ones. You have a set of young employees within an organization who come in and maybe feel like, oh no, we know all the new ways of doing things. We have all the answers. I think in that kind of way, they
Yeah.
exclude the generation because then they're not consulting, they're not seeking to get their own perspective. So it's a two-way thing. The younger can make the older ones feel included, something or whatever, and the older ones who tend to occupy like the leadership positions can also create an environment where people can brainstorm, bring their ideas, and talk about different perspectives. There is no perfect workplace generally. And whether as an organization, do they recognize that they have these kinds of staff? And I would say yes. So a simple example is like on Fridays, some workplaces close earlier on Fridays, 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever arrangement they have. On Fridays, you find organizations that are closing by 2 o'clock, maybe 1:30, some even 12 o'clock, just to give the Muslim staff time and the opportunity to be able to go for the Friday Jumat prayer. I think that's inclusivity. So these are some of the policies I think that are being practiced within the Nigerian context that have actually helped
Yeah.
to create inclusive workforce.
I think that's a great example, actually, of how inclusive we are in the country when it comes to religion. Of course, more can be done in terms of being more open to other people's perspectives. And I think that when it comes to these religious differences, I don't think that people engage in conversations like this at work just because of how that could easily escalate. So I think that there's a sensing that these are topics that we don't really talk about in the workplace, and I think that's really important. I wanted to maybe also talk about the benefits. Like, so when we have a workplace where we have this kind of religious understanding and accommodation and inclusivity in that sense, what are some other benefits? What are some benefits to this? Like when we have this kind of inclusive way of working in teams, how might team members feel? Like, what are some benefits of that? I'm thinking specifically around maybe perhaps feedback, right? When a leader is maybe one who is very open and empathic towards the staff, chances are when they're giving feedback, they're not so scared, because feedback is another scary thing when it comes to performance management. Yeah, so I feel like that could be one way to benefit from a more open, more inclusive environment, because people will be open to feedback and be open to learning how to be better at their job.
I agree with you. I think that a team is a smaller aspect of the organization, like a small rep of the entire organization. And so inclusivity, in fact, I feel like the team is the best place to begin to practice the inclusivity. Just like you said, if you have a team where team members feel like they're close enough to the team leaders to be able to express some of their challenges and to be able to receive feedback in a manner that is constructive within the context of the team, that team member begins to feel comfortable enough to speak up, to go the extra mile, because there's a general understanding that, oh, this is what we're trying to achieve. And the team leader has created an environment where people feel free enough to express themselves and, brainstorm on ideas. And so if you have different teams creating that inclusive environment altogether, when you aggregate it, it becomes an inclusive work. It does help with team performance. Inclusivity does help, especially performance management. So, in the context of performance management, there are organizations where performance management is just a box ticking exercise. You bring your form, we assess you and say you've done well, and then you take it and you go away.
Yeah.
organizations as well where the staff or team members feel like the performance management, or especially the performance appraisal period, time for the leader to retaliate, or if he or she is not happy with any of the team members. And for the leader practicing an inclusive workplace, it would mean that even in the delivery of the feedback, it's done in a manner that encourages staff, makes them feel like they're included, and also identify the areas where they need support, and come up with some plan to be able to help them bridge any skills gaps.
I mean, when we do performance management, when it's done correctly, of course, the returns are incredible, right? Because you're able to meet your targets, and you do that in a safe and a thriving environment. I also like what you said about culture. I think that when we think about workplace culture, when it comes to respect, and I think that's an important around respect, not just the respect to the higher ups or the seniors, but also the respect we have one another. I think that's also very important when we have that in the workplace. So creating that culture of respect, creating the culture of openness, and of course inclusivity is also very important, and that starts at the team level. And when we think about how does a workplace assume its culture, or how does it create its culture, it's created like one person at a time, one team at a time. So I completely agree with you. Yeah, and I also want to think about what are some other benefits to having an inclusive workplace. I wonder if the culture of designing team agreements is something that's common, would you say? Team agreement is where you, as a leader, you have a conversation or a workshop with your team members, and you basically co-create how you want to work together when it comes to communication styles, collaboration, how you work together, how you work on tasks together as a team, on decision making, the values and the culture of the team, so staff well-being and wellness, as well as conflict management. I wonder if this is something that is done in a very systematic way in your experience.
So I would answer this question from two angles. I will answer from the aspect of what I have done as a team lead in my years of experience, and I would also answer from the perspective of what I have seen being done across organizations that I've worked with. There are organizations who develop what you would call operations manual. It's not necessarily the team agreement, but within that manual, you have all these different aspects of the workplace. Oh, okay, so with regards to this is how we would approach it. This is how we operate as a team. This is how we answer emails and escalate issues, resolve conflicts. I've seen that. As a team leader, for me, having a playbook, and I call it a playbook, a very critical aspect of running an effective team. I feel like when you start to lead a team, it's very important, especially if the team already existed before you came in. It's important to first of all have the one-on-one sessions, the members of the team, just to hear their own perspective, what's going on. Those kinds of one-on-one sessions would also help the leader understand the context, the dynamics, team dynamics, understand the politics as well. Yeah, and so what I did when I developed something like that was to have the one-on-one sessions with the different members of the team, and in so doing, I was able to understand how things were done. Okay, at the time I joined, things were a bit chaotic. So yes, they were functioning, but it wasn't written down it wasn't documented in any structured manner. Okay, and so I went ahead to do was to develop team playbook. So within the playbook, we took all the different aspects of the work that the team does in terms of operations, and outlined them, defined them, and clarified how we were going to approach. It was very useful. And after developing that, we sat down together and reviewed the document, and people had to say, oh no, I don't agree with what you've written here. No, 24-hour response time to emails is too short. Why don't you make it 48 hours? Even though I would prefer to make it 12 hours. At the end of the day, that particular exercise helped to make all the team members feel included in how we agreed that we were going to operate team. So it wasn't that some bringing some kind of policy and imposing it on them. It was that we co-created it together. And I think that spirit of co-creation is one of the key ways of promoting inclusiveness in the
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah, I like what you said there, because when you co-create that experience, that is kind of understanding where people are coming from, because of course we're humans, we will make mistakes, we're going to misinterpret the look or maybe a way of speaking that you find maybe rude, and maybe that's not what that person intended. So understanding where people are coming from, how they work, how they plan to engage, what happens when there's a misunderstanding, the values, when that's co-created, it definitely generates a lot of trust. Right? I think that a good or a leader who is managing a well-functioning team definitely needs the buy-in and trust of the people that they're managing. And so creating that team agreement can be very powerful in, again, setting expectations as well as building trust, not only from the line manager to the staff, but also between, right? Because everyone says, okay, what they like. And like you mentioned, you met everybody and they said, hey, this is how I work. This is what works for me. And then you come together and say, okay, how do you move this forward? And yeah, so for me, a team agreement is a great way to bring alignment in the workplace, and definitely fosters the spirit of inclusivity, because you do feel seen, because you're adding to it, right? I would imagine.
You are adding to it. And I think that, so separate from having the overarching policy for that guides the organization as a whole, every team within the organization should have an understanding and agreement
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
how they work. And then there should be some sort of opportunity where different teams come together. Now the whole organization coming together, and then this team saying, oh, hey guys, we as the maybe communications team, where there are 5 of us in the team, and this is how we do things. This is how we collaborate. This is how we resolve conflict. This is how we escalate issues and other teams. And I think together, the aggregation of all these different agreements, if done properly, would be a very good representation of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you with that. I think that's extremely important. When you were speaking, I thought, yeah, conflict management. I think that one of the major reasons why there's a toxicity in the workplace, it kind of stems from misunderstanding and the conflict, because that's what you end up having to deal with in the workplace. And so definitely having a space to talk about what gets you ticked. And if you're also stressed out, how do we know that you're stressed out? And how does that impact the way you react with one another in the workplace? I think these are all elements that need to be lifted up when we're talking about an inclusive workplace.
Absolutely. I think we should talk a bit more about the conflict management, because it's a very key aspect. I mean, when you bring people from diverse backgrounds together, there is bound to be conflict. And conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. If handled properly, it can actually help to build relationships. It can boost productivity. And so, in terms of creating a workplace where staff members can thrive, it is very important to have some sort of system for managing conflict such that it does not escalate and become something that is turned into a negative experience, but is looked at as an opportunity to hear differing views and sort of find a middle ground for moving forward. Conflict management is very key in creating an inclusive workplace, because imagine if the two had a disagreement now and then we're able to resolve it and move forward from that. I would feel included, especially with regards to the way my own grievances were handled.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
feel included if you felt that your grievances were handled properly.
Yeah.
And I found organizations that have called escalation mechanisms. I mean, there are regular disagreements that colleagues have, and you get over that. But then when something becomes like really serious, and you can't find a middle ground, and maybe somebody begins to feel like the other person is maybe not treating them right, how do you go there to resolving? Who do you talk to next? How does that get resolved? So yeah, it's all part of creating that workplace where people think about Monday morning and they don't dread it. They Sunday evening they're looking forward to going to work. I've worked in a place like that where I was excited to work on Monday. I've worked in a very inclusive environment In fact,
Awesome.
I worked in an environment that was so inclusive that we were like a tight knit family. Even me, we didn't have our disagreements, but we always found a way to, resolve them and grow from it. Another thing that can help in creating an inclusive workplace environment is the inclusion of less formal engagements within the
Mm.
organization, the incorporation of some of this more relaxed activities that help to
Mm.
create the bonding is very important. So
Mhm.
how do you celebrate birthdays? How do you mark the end of the year? How do you,
Yeah.
these things, how do you recognize people? How do you support people when they are in need? So doing those kinds of things make people feel seen. When you feel valued, it's automatic. You just want to give more. You want to
Of
do
course.
more. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
in terms of the benefits of inclusiveness in the workplace, I mean, the benefits are to the organization as a whole at the end of the
Mm.
day, because when your staff are happy, when they feel motivated to work,
Mhm.
you will achieve results. And even when you're falling behind on something, you will be able
Mhm.
to rally together and, cover the gap very quickly.
Yeah, so it's very important for us to really lean in and of course make sure that team leaders are able to understand this, right? I think that there should be some level of intentionality. So it's not just, oh, it's a nice line manager or people manager who understands inclusivity. So they're going to be really careful about how they create the culture, right? We don't want that scenario. We want a scenario where that is embedded in the system of the organization, where it's actually very intentional. But I also want to say one thing when it comes to conflict. I'm kind of going back, and that is, I wonder if people understand what their conflict styles are. Conflict and communication, I think, are the two big hitters. If you can get those two under wraps, you're good. And so I was just thinking, I was just reflecting, do people know their conflict management style, how they react when conflict arises? Do you know yours?
Used to know the name for it. I'm not sure I can remember, but I do know how I handle conflict,
Mm.
as opposed to say maybe how a close friend handles conflict. But yeah, you are right. There are different ways by which people handle conflict, and that also affects how they're able to resolve the
Mhm.
issue very
Mhm.
quickly or not.
I'm kind of person, when something is happening, I want to just deal with it right away. Like they call this kind of people like the sharks. I'm not a bad one, the mean one.
Definitely say you're not a mean shark. You don't
No,
even look like you don't look like a shark. I don't think that's the correct. Well, I don't think that's
this
the
is so,
right.
so we have like the sharks. So these are the ones that, like, something happens, they want it fixed now. And then you
Yeah.
have the turtles. They're the conflict avoidant people. Like, oh, there's a conflict, they keep quiet. Don't want to ruffle the feathers of anyone. And then you have the teddy bears. They're like accommodate and want to keep the peace. So, and there's the owl. The owl is the one that's pretty wise and knows when to play the cards. Like, when to be a shark, when to be a turtle, and when a teddy bear. Yeah.
Okay. I wonder where the passive aggressive people would fall within that. Those who feel hurt and they don't speak out, but they react. They don't
Yeah, with
say
their actions.
exactly. And I think that when I was much younger, I was maybe a sharky. I want to resolve it now.
Yeah.
But then
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn to read the room. And so
Mm.
there are cases where that's a good idea. You have an issue, you resolve it, we move on. But then
Yeah.
sometimes that particular environment is not ripe or ready for that conversation. And in such instances, in my experience, no way you would approach that conversation that it will lead to anything productive. Things will just
Mm.
keep escalating. Words will just keep getting misinterpreted. I think within an organization, ability for conflict management at the end of the day falls on the team leaders. So whether it's a conflict that is happening within your team or across
Mm-hmm.
teams, if it's across teams, the team leaders could come together, try
Mm-hmm.
to resolve it, and help their team members work together to overcome or to resolve the
Yeah.
issue.
I agree with you, and the buck stops on their desk, right? But at the same time, there's also a responsibility within the team, and this is where this team agreement comes into play. Because if I understand that when you're upset or something is not going well, this is how you are. It's not personal. I'm not going to take it personally, right? So a lot of times the misunderstanding happens when you do something or act in a certain way, and I take it the wrong way, and then it's like, psh, Bumi is like this. Then I tell one person, the other person tells, and then it's a war. So again, when we are able to talk about our experiences around stress management, or personal issues, if we know how to understand each other and learn how to engage better, then chances of that resolving better also happens. I'll give an example. One time, I had a colleague, we were working together on a project, and I was supposed to do a particular aspect of the project, and she was supposed to do a different one, right? So when I came to present my idea, she's Norwegian. When I came to present my idea, she was like, well, this is not up to my standard, or something like, this does not meet my standard. And I was like, excuse me? In my mind, I was like, who are you? In my mind, this was the thing going on in my head. I was like, who are you to tell me it's not to your standard? Excuse me, we're working together. And I tried to explain to her, and she still wasn't getting it. So I got a bit frustrated. And then we end the conversation. I was just going to go back and make some corrections. And then, but I didn't say anything. I didn't say a word. And then maybe like a day or two, she's texted me back. She pinged me like, hey, Amara, are you okay? And are we okay? Because we're very good friends. We're like, we work well together. And I said, yeah, I'm fine. Everything is good. She's like, I wonder, should we have a conversation? Because I feel like maybe we need to talk. And I was like, okay, sure. So we had the conversation. And of course, I expressed, my frustration with the conversation and how she spoke to me. And she's like, oh my gosh, no, like she was thinking Norwegian. And like, this is how she would say it in Norwegian. And so it was like this language barrier. If we didn't have a good relationship, that would have just escalated, and then maybe I would stop talking to her. I don't know. So yeah, it really helps when you have a good relationship, because then you can actually talk about it and move forward.
Yeah. And there are instances where two people disagree on something, an idea, a project, and they're not able to find the middle ground. What helped you in your situation was that you were very good friends with the lady. You had lots of positive experiences, and so you guys were able to overcome that little negative experience. But I've had experiences where I disagreed with someone and I called on my boss. So like myself and someone else reporting to the same person, and me and that person disagreeing, okay? And we couldn't find the middle ground. And I reported the issue to the boss, hoping that the person would step in and say, you guys come, let's, and the person never did. So again, it's the leader's conflict management style also plays a role. So you have team members who are disagreeing, but how capable or how willing, as a matter of fact, is the leader to step in? And there are some leaders that don't want to be involved in, they see it as messy. They see it as, oh, you guys are not babies, go and resolve your issue. Yes, that may work sometimes, but it doesn't always work. And I don't think there's any harm in bringing two people together to say, okay, Bumi, so what exactly was the issue? So what exactly is the issue? And then, sometimes having a third party, sort of like a mediator, when there's a conflict, it helps. Sometimes when we're trying to resolve issues, we're only hearing what we want to hear. The other person is stopped. All you're thinking about is what you are going to say in response. You're not settling down to internalize and to listen and to empathize. That's what a third party would bring to the table. The leader's temperament, the leader's management style plays a strong role in how included people feel within the organization. And there's another aspect of inclusivity that we haven't actually touched. And I think and that's when people work in silos. Because if as a team we're focused on our own goals, everybody is protecting their own turf, definitely it will not be an inclusive workplace, because then there is unhealthy competition. And then it doesn't feel like everybody's working towards the same goals. It's almost like, oh, I'm trying to achieve this while you go and that. And so another thing that I think would be very key in creating an inclusive workplace is coming up with some sort of system that forces people to work together. In my previous workplace, there was a tool that I developed that helped with this a lot into the breaking silos. So what we did was we identified the high level deliverables for the organization as a whole, and then for each of them, we identified the leads. Okay, and then for each of those deliverables, we identified the leads and the collaborators. You get, And so it was the responsibility of every lead to involve the collaborator in the delivery of that particular milestone. And it forced people to talk together in an environment where nobody wanted to work together. It was very key in bridging the gap.
I can imagine also when they give a report or progress review kind of aspect to that work, that could be one way to also get people to talk on behalf of the team. And then, of course, they'll have to have had a chance to work together with that. So you're absolutely right with silos. And I think that also comes with being very intentional, right? In the beginning, we talked about the need to be intentional in the way we create the team, like the way we co-create, the way we work together. And so, yeah, silos are definitely a big problem. It happens. It's a huge challenge in the workplace. And one way to kind of address that is creating systems and also being intentional. I talk about intentionality because you should never just assume people understand or know what to do. As a line manager, you set the tone for that. But maybe what are some of our takeaways when we talk about inclusivity? Like, how can team leads be better at creating inclusivity in the workplace? Can you think of maybe one or two things that any leader who's listening right now might pick up on that and try to include it in the way they work? What would you suggest?
For me, the first is, like I said before, introduce informal and relaxed activities. As long as you are all clear on what the results to be achieved are, as long as a leader you have put square pegs in square holes, leveraging on everybody's strength and their expertise, I think that there is value in creating an opportunity for people to just let their hair down, load off their feet. Because I find that it is in these kind of relaxed environments where people feel free enough to talk about what's really bothering them and all that. I've worked with line managers over the years of my career, and I'm still in touch with them. In fact, from one line manager to the other line manager then transitions and becomes like a mentor.
Amazing.
Yes, it's very important for that kind of bond to be created. I remember just after COVID when I started a new job and organizational structure had it in such a way that I was reporting to a particular person. What I did was to write an email because the person hadn't reached out to me because we hadn't even resumed yet officially. We were still working from home during COVID. It was to write him an email to say, "Oh, dear Susan, so I just realized now that I'm reporting to you. I look forward to working with you. But do you think before we resume, would you like a few minutes for us to chat? I would like to understand your leadership style, what you look out for, and also maybe to help you understand how I work and all that." And he was so shocked, like, "Who is this girl? Like, what? Do people actually do this?" And almost 5 years later, he and I were like so close, so bonded because we had that conversation. And he told me, "Oh, look, I get very impatient. I do this, I like this, I like this, I like this, And I also said, "Oh, this is how I like to be managed. This is how I like to work." By the time we resumed, we just hit it off. And there were times when maybe he wasn't happy with me because of something I did. But because we had already established a very strong bond, so the environment is very important. In my last two previous workplaces I had, and they called me the director of socials. Someone actually playfully referred to me one day as the glue that brings people together. It's something I believe very strongly in. I mean, how much percent of your 24 hours do you spend in the workplace? I would say a large portion.
Huge.
So why not? Doesn't it stand to reason that it should be a nice place where you enjoy? Why should you? Yeah. So why should you go and work in a place where you're miserable? No. And the funny thing, it's beyond money that makes people feel loyal or tied to a workplace. It's the little things, the very little things. It's the, "Oh, how are you doing? Oh, your daughter wasn't feeling well. How's she feeling today? Oh, it's very little, and it goes a long way."
I like that. I really love that. I like what you just said there about the environment, and this is something I definitely 100% talk about all the time, is we spend such a long time at work. Like, we might as well humanize the workplace. We might as well make it a place where we feel alive. Imagine we spend 8 hours. Imagine if you don't get along with your teammate or your line manager. It's like, man, that just leads to chronic illness down the line. Pent up stress is not good for us, right? So yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely right about creating the kind of
I wonder, Amara, but I think that the context might also be different. I've spent the large percentage of my career working in the development sector. So that's the non-governmental organizations. And these are organizations that are not profit driven, right? We're driven by outcomes, we're driven by impact that we make. But I've also seen organizations that are profit driven. And I've seen how ferocious, like, it's like you're working in a place with sharks. Everybody's out to shine, everybody, and then they give you these ridiculous targets. A friend of mine shared with me his target for the last quarter in 2024. And I can't even wrap my head around it. It was ridiculous. And because of that, he wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating well. All he was thinking about was how to meet his target because he didn't want to lose his job. Because again, talk about fear. Fear also plays a role in terms of people being too scared to stand up and push back because there's that thought that, oh, if I push back and they call my bluff, for example, and they send me out, will I get another job? And then I've got responsibilities, I've got school fees to pay, and so the pressure is just too much. And so, like, you talked about stress management, and so you find a lot of workplace, they're unhappy, they're depressed, they're stressed, they're not healthy. So I wonder, because if I were to advise such a profit-driven organization to say, you know what, guys, ease up on the target, make it realistic, and actually give these people room to breathe and exist and thrive in this environment. I wonder if that advice would be received warmly. It might be like, oh no, our bottom line, what you're saying, no, it can't work.
You have to make money.
Yes. What do you think? Do you think it's possible to create an inclusive environment like that in such a profit-driven?
Yeah, I think there are many examples of profit-driven companies that are human as well, they're able to take into consideration their staff. Because guess what? You're going to have people stay long-term without getting sick, and you retain the knowledge, you retain the expertise, and they still are able to develop or they're able to deliver. Like you rightly said, when people feel loyal, when the people feel like this intrinsic motivation to do good work, they're going to go all out to do the work as long as it's like humanely possible. But when we put unnecessary, like crazy targets, and I do know what you're talking about because I know a couple of my friends are in like the investments in the banking sector, and it's just crazy. So I know how much they suffer. And that's why I think this is very important that we have this conversation. Obviously, maybe the experience we've had are quite colored by the type of environment we work in. But yes, there are different types of sectors, and each of these sectors may not necessarily be as inclusive as we would wish.
Or receptive to the idea in the first place. I mean, all organizations, they want to achieve results. I mean, the results might differ, but you set up an organization because there are certain types of results you want to achieve. So I think that it would be counterintuitive to my mind to create an environment where you've set such targets or you have results to achieve, and then you make the environment so unconducive to even achieve the result. It's like you're fighting yourself. I know an organization that the only way for them to have meaningful relationships with other human beings is to date one another. There's just no time. So they marry one another. It's even allowed, it's in the policy. But the problem is when you get married, then one person must leave the organization.
Naturally.
Yeah. But imagine you working in an environment where the only people you'd ever meet are the people at work because you're closing by 8 p.m., you're coming to work by 8 p.m., you're working on Saturdays, you don't have time for parties, you don't have time, no social life. That's not an environment.
No, don't want that. That's why we want to have this kind of conversation to raise awareness. I think part of this is also raising awareness. And I think that one way to address those types of leaders in those types of organizations is to let them understand the benefits of having an environment where people really feel like connected to the work and they're able to do it not out of fear, but because they really enjoy it and they have the capacity to do good work.
Yeah.
That's very possible. And this is why we need maybe more training, like more leaders going through leadership development. Let's have a more intentional way when it comes to well functioning teams or how to create well functioning teams. Let there be some way that this aspect of inclusion is embedded in the systems that guide the way they work in the workplace. And yeah,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, creating a nice and conducive environment, like relaxing a bit, and you just, let's just be human. Let's just be human
Right.
and do good work. Like no needs for all the stuffiness and the robotic
Yes.
behaviors. They're just not ideal. Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful.
Remember we talked about respect and we
Mhm.
talked about how can, if not managed properly, can be a hindrance to inclusiveness in terms of openness of conversation, freedom to express oneself. But I wouldn't say that the solution would be to get rid of, that whole respectful
I mean, that's
approach.
hard to do. That's hard to do
Yeah,
anyway, right? This is
yeah,
our culture.
yeah.
Yeah.
And besides, we are Nigerian, and respect for it's very much embedded in the way we work, the way we relate with people,
Yeah.
and so I feel like there are ways to be respectful. There are ways to respectfully disagree. There
Mm.
are ways to present, even if it's a dissenting opinion, in a manner that does not make another person feel belittled or
Mm.
disrespected.
Yeah.
So, and I say this because when you think about inclusiveness, but we're not saying, okay, as Nigerians or as Nigerian organizations, let's just adopt what is being
Mhm.
practiced in other cultures.
No. No.
What we're saying is let us adapt. So take a good idea and then adapt it to your own context. But
Hmm.
the bottom line is just
Yeah.
whatever you can do to create an environment where people will thrive, the organization thrives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Bumi. I appreciate those perspectives. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Line managers across the board need to understand what makes people feel connected, what makes people feel aligned. So create your team agreements, have regular conversations, learn how to give good feedback, understand the importance of this collegial way of engaging in the workplace. Let it be relaxed yet respectful. And yes, let's learn about perspective taking. Let's learn about how to not be so judgmental. Let's wait to hear what people have to say before making up our ideas instead of assumptions and then, yeah, going off the deep end. Yeah,
Um,
these are all very, very important. Yes. Mhm.
Amara, I'd just like to say here too that I think it's important to provide a balanced argument.
Mhm.
When a team leader is making an effort to ensure that team members feel included, it
Mm.
beholds those team members to also prove that they can deliver results, even in light of maybe some of the accommodations that have been made. I'll give you an example. When I had my second daughter, I resumed from maternity leave and I had a conversation with my boss because I was struggling. Okay, there was a crash in the organization, so there was a place where I could go and nurse her. But then closing by 5, it became very difficult for me to manage closing, pick up the baby, you're rushing home, you're doing homework for the older child and all that.
Mm.
And so I had a conversation with my manager and said, you know what, please, I'm struggling. Before I approached him, I had thought about some ways by which maybe I could overcome that challenge. And one of the proposals I made to him was, can I just be closing by 3 o'clock? Can you give me 2 hours? And those 2 hours made a world of difference. One, because I was closing at a time when traffic hadn't built up. I was sorting out all my domestic responsibilities, and I still had time to finish whatever work I hadn't finished in the office.
Mm.
And I feel, and I say this with every sense of humility, that I
Yeah.
feel that the reason why he was even receptive to the idea in the first place was because I had demonstrated that I could
Mm.
deliver results. So
Mhm.
that's the
Mhm.
thing. A leader will only be willing to make those accommodations if they are sure that the work itself will not suffer. And so, as a
Mm.
team member, you must demonstrate, you must prove, yes, please give me this concession so that I can manage my life, so that I can have work life balance. But I promise you that I'll still deliver the results as you have requested, as when due. So, it's a two-way street. I don't want us to just look at the leaders and say, oh, you must do this, you must create a conducive environment, you must involve everybody in decision making, you must give people enough leeway. The team members also have to prove that they are worth the efforts in the first place, you know?
Yeah, I see your point there around being accountable. I think that's the word, that being accountable and being able to really deliver results. But at the same time, though, I do think that one way to ensure that staff members are up to task and are doing their work is effective feedback. So that performance management has to be there. And when performance starts to slip, then the line manager can help correct or provide them with the resources to do a good job. I think we definitely want to go away from the idea of this punitive way of thinking around, well, if you don't do good thing, if you don't do a good job, well, I'm not going to help you, or you're not going to get the concessions you need. Then it causes the staff members to kind of, I think that so the idea of us in the workplace is to do good work. That's everybody's responsibility, not just the line manager. The line manager is just there to kind of hold the fort, but the work itself has to be done by staff members. And that commitment is extremely important because you're getting paid for it. You're getting paid for it. So it's extremely important that team members are in the right position. Second, they have the support that they need to do good work. And third, that they have the line manager to kind of guide, to kind of steer the sheep, so that they do good work. So I agree. Like, people definitely need to be accountable to the work, and they can't be slacking off and expecting that everything is just, la-di-da. And that doesn't work either. Yeah. So we've come to the end of today's podcast. Thank you so much for all the insights and the nuggets you shared. I think we've had a very, very interesting, engaging, and lots of wonderful ways that people can adopt to create more inclusivity in the workplace. And Bumi, is there anything you would want to share about maybe what you're doing? Because I know you do a lot. You also have a mentoring program, and you also write. So perhaps you can share where people might be able to find your work.
Yeah, thanks, Amara. So first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been very interesting. I've enjoyed the conversation. I mean, it's a topic that is not very widely discussed, and I think we need to talk about more, increase awareness in terms of the value of an inclusive workplace. So thank you very much. And in terms of what I'm doing outside of work, yes, I do have a passion for helping young people, mentoring young people, and I run a mentorship program on the side. It's called the Discovery Mentorship Initiative, a structured approach to helping young people first discover who they are so that they can better leverage their strengths, address their weaknesses, to be able to be their best selves and also lead in the future. So yes, I will share some details with you so that maybe you can post it up at some point. And yes, I also write. I've always written, but I only started publishing, I think, early this year. So I'm still, I'm not very well published, but I am. I'm on Medium, so you can find some of my work on Medium. Yes, and I'll share the link. I hope to write more. Yeah, and then so my biggest passion, my greatest accomplishment is that I'm a mother of two.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And motherhood is like my number one job. Everything else is just, so that's also something that's very, very dear to me. So thank you, Amara, for having me. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and it was such a splendid poster.
Thank you. It was really fun. I'm just trying to find her on Medium. So yes, Bumi Saidi. That's what you go by, right? On Medium. Yes. So go on Medium and follow her writing. She's amazing. She's exquisite. I love her writing. She talks on different topics. Very interesting, very wide variety. So yes, please make sure you find her on Medium. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you so much to all the listeners too. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, be well. Thank you.